Imagine being a princess. You've lived your entire life in a palace, servants at your command, silk robes, the finest food. Then one day, Mongol warriors storm through your city gates. Your father, the king, is dead. Your brothers are dead. And you're being dragged across the steppe to become property of the man who just destroyed everything you've ever known. Welcome to life as a concubine of Genghis Khan. This isn't a romance story. This isn't about power or influence. This is about what it actually meant to be a captive woman in the court of the world's most powerful conqueror. So hit that like button, smash subscribe, and let's dive into some serious Mongol madness. Let's start with the uncomfortable truth that nobody really talks about. Genghis Khan had hundreds of concubines, not dozens, hundreds. And here's the thing, most of them weren't volunteers. They were queens, princesses, and noblewomen from conquered territories. When the Mongols took a city, the most beautiful and high-born women were specifically selected and sent to the Khan's court. Sometimes they came as diplomatic gifts from rulers trying to avoid getting conquered. But let's call it what it really was. They were spoils of war, human trophies. The Mongol system of concubinage wasn't about romance or even political alliance like you might see with wives. It was about demonstrating total dominance. When you conquered a kingdom, you didn't just take their land and treasure. You took their women, especially the royal women, to show everyone that you owned everything they once had. Now, before we go further, we need to understand the difference between wives and concubines in Mongol society, because this is crucial. Genghis Khan had official wives, his primary wife, Berta, and several others who had actual legal status and power. These wives had rights. They could own property, command armies, give orders, and their sons could potentially become great Khan. Concubines? They had basically no rights at all. Think of it this way. Wives were partners in the empire. Concubines were possessions. A wife's children were legitimate heirs who could inherit titles, territories, and power. A concubine's children, they were illegitimate. They might get some minor position if they were lucky, maybe a small piece of land or a command in the army if they proved themselves useful, but they were never going to inherit the empire. They were essentially second-class children from second-class mothers. The social gap was enormous. And let's be brutally honest about what concubinage actually meant. This wasn't some romanticized harem situation with women lounging around being pampered. It was sexual servitude. These women had been ripped from their homes, marched hundreds or thousands of miles across harsh terrain, and were now the sexual property of a man who had probably killed their families. They had no choice in any of this. No voice, no autonomy. When the Khan wanted you, you came. When he was done with you, you waited until he wanted you again. That was your entire existence. Some historians try to soften this by saying concubines had a certain status or were well provided for. And sure, compared to a common slave, maybe. But compared to a free woman, compared to what their lives were before conquest, this was a gilded cage at best, and at worst, it was just slavery with better living conditions. So what did a typical day actually look like for one of these women? Let's walk through it. You'd wake up in the women's quarters, a section of large jers or sometimes more permanent structures if you were at Karakoram, the Mongol capital. You wouldn't wake up alone. You'd be surrounded by dozens or even hundreds of other concubines, all in the same situation. The quarters were segregated by rank. The most favored concubines, usually the most beautiful or those who had recently given birth to sons, got better accommodations. Everyone else was packed in together. Privacy was basically non-existent. You'd wake to the sounds of other women crying, praying, or just trying to survive another day. Your first task would be making yourself presentable because you never knew when you might be summoned. The pressure to maintain your appearance was constant and terrifying. If you lost your looks, you lost any value you had. Concubines were expected to dress in fine clothes, silk deals, elaborate jewelry, cosmetics made from ground minerals and plant dyes. But here's the dark irony. You were dressing up for a man you probably despised, using clothes and jewelry that were likely plundered from your own homeland. The Mongols loved showing off their wealth, and beautiful, well-dressed concubines were part of that display. You weren't dressing for yourself. You were dressing because you were decoration, a living trophy that needed to stay shiny. After dressing, your day would be filled with waiting. Just waiting. Some concubines were assigned tasks, supervising lower servants, doing embroidery, weaving, preparing certain foods or medicines, but mostly you waited. Waited to be summoned. Waited to find out if the Khan would call for you that night or if it would be someone else. And this waiting wasn't peaceful. It was anxious. Because being called meant you had value. Not being called meant you were being forgotten. And being forgotten in a system where your only worth was your desirability. That was terrifying. You could go from favored concubine to completely discarded in a matter of weeks if you fell out of favor or if younger, more beautiful captives arrived from a new conquest. Meals were communal but hierarchical. The most favored concubines ate better food, mutton, mare's milk, sometimes imported delicacies from trade routes. The less favored ate basic food. You'd eat together in the women's quarters, and I imagine the atmosphere was tense. These weren't friends. These were rivals. Every woman there knew that her survival, her treatment, her children's futures all depended on catching and keeping the Khan's attention. So there was jealousy, backstabbing, alliances that formed and dissolved. Some historical accounts mention concubines poisoning each other or spreading rumors to damage a rival's reputation. When your entire existence depends on being chosen over other women, solidarity becomes a luxury you can't afford. If you were summoned to the Khan's ger, you'd go. You had no choice. You'd be bathed, perfumed, dressed in your finest clothes, and sent to him. What happened there isn't really recorded in detail. Medieval historians weren't writing romance novels, but we know it wasn't consensual in any meaningful way. How could it be? You're a captive. He owns you. After, you'd return to the women's quarters and wait again. If you got pregnant, everything changed. Suddenly, you had value again. You were carrying a potential son. Pregnant concubines received better treatment, better food, more attention. If you gave birth to a son, even better. You'd be moved to better quarters, given servants of your own, treated with more respect. But if you gave birth to a daughter, your value dropped again. Daughters of concubines were useful for political marriages, but they didn't carry the same weight as sons. The psychological toll of this life is hard to overstate. You're living in constant competition with other traumatized women. You have no autonomy. Your children, if you have them, will never have the status of legitimate heirs. You can't leave. You can't refuse. You can't even express your real feelings because showing the wrong emotion to the wrong person could get you punished or killed. Some women probably found ways to cope, forming genuine friendships despite the competition, finding meaning in small daily rituals, maybe even developing a kind of Stockholm syndrome where they convinced themselves their situation wasn't so bad. But others, historical records mention concubines who committed suicide, who went mad, who tried to escape and were brutally punished. This wasn't a life anyone would choose. And here's something that really drives home how little agency these women had. They couldn't even control what happened to them after Genghis Khan died. When he died in 1227, some of his concubines were inherited by his sons and grandsons like property. Others were sent to live out their days in obscurity, essentially retired but never free. Some were even killed and buried with him according to some accounts, though this is debated by historians. Either way, their fate was decided for them. Again, always. Now, not every concubine's story was exactly the same. Some women reportedly gained influence through intelligence and cunning. There are accounts of concubines who became trusted advisors, who managed to secure better futures for their children, who even wielded indirect power by influencing the Khan's decisions. But these were the exceptions, not the rule. And even these successful concubines, were still fundamentally prisoners operating within a system designed to strip them of power. Calling them powerful is like calling a well-treated slave lucky. It misses the point entirely. Let's talk about the clothes and appearance standards more, because this was a huge part of daily life. Concubines were expected to maintain elaborate hairstyles, multiple braids decorated with jewelry, ribbons, and ornaments. Their deals were made from the finest silk, often in bright colors like red, blue, or gold, with intricate embroidery. They wore jewelry, silver or gold earrings, necklaces, rings, sometimes even headdresses if they were particularly favored. Cosmetics were important too. White powder to lighten the skin, rouge for cheeks, darkened eyebrows. But maintaining all this required hours of work each day. And remember, you're doing this while living in a tent on the steppe where dust storms were common, where bathing was rare, where you might be traveling for months as the court moved from place to place. The pressure to look perfect in imperfect conditions must have been exhausting. The social dynamics among the concubines themselves deserve more attention because this is where things got really dark. You had women from dozens of different conquered territories: Chinese, Persian, Tangut, Turkic, Russian, all thrown together, unable to speak each other's languages, from completely different cultures, all competing for the attention of one man. The favoritism created vicious hierarchies. The current favorites had power over everyone else. They could make your life better or worse with a word. And positions changed constantly. This month's favorite could be next month's forgotten woman if a new conquest brought fresh captives. The instability alone would drive anyone crazy. You couldn't trust anyone. You couldn't relax. You were always performing, always competing, always afraid. And let's talk about the children again, because this is heartbreaking. If you were a concubine who gave birth to a son, you'd raise him knowing he'd never be Great Khan. He'd never rule the empire. The best he could hope for was some military command or minor administrative post if he proved himself useful and loyal. You'd watch the sons of the official wives grow up with every advantage: education, training, resources, respect, while your son got scraps. And if you had a daughter, she'd grow up knowing she was the daughter of a captive, destined to be married off to some minor noble or officer as a political favor. Your children would carry the stigma of their birth forever. That's a special kind of pain, knowing you brought children into the world who'd never be free of the circumstances of their conception. So here's the reality we need to face. Life as a concubine of Genghis Khan wasn't some exotic adventure or romantic fantasy. It was trauma. It was powerlessness. It was watching everything you knew destroyed and then being forced to serve the destroyer. It was living in constant fear and competition. It was having children you couldn't protect or give a real future to. It was being valued only for your body and your beauty, knowing that once those faded, you'd have nothing. The Mongols built the largest land empire in history, and part of how they did that was through systematic sexual violence and exploitation of conquered women. That's just the truth. We can acknowledge Mongol military genius and administrative innovation, while also acknowledging this darker reality. Both things are true. If you made it through this video, you now know something most people don't: the real story behind the concubines of Genghis Khan. Not the sanitized version, not the romanticized version, but the actual historical reality of what these women endured. It's uncomfortable, it's dark, but it's important. Hit that like button, subscribe to Mongol Madness for more untold stories from the Mongol Empire, and drop a comment telling me what surprised you most about this topic. And remember, history isn't always pretty, but it's always worth understanding. See you in the next one.